The delete route is now set up and tested. It's time to start on the final route for managing our to-do resources. This is going to be the route that lets you update a to-do item, whether you want to change the text to something else or whether you want to toggle it as completed. Now, this is going to be the most complex route we write. Everything so far has been relatively straightforward. We're going to need to do a few extra things to get this updating route to work as expected. The first thing I want to do before we go ahead and create the route down below is install that Lodash library we used in one of the previous sections for this course. If you remember, Lodash provides a few really great utility functions, and we'll be taking advantage of a couple of those inside of our update route. Right here, I'm going to use npm I with the save flag to install it. The module name itself is called lo-lodash, and we'll be using the most recent version at 4.15.0. Now, once this is installed, we can require it up top, and then we can go ahead and add our route. At the very top of the file, we can make a constant. We'll use underscore as the name for the variable that stores the Lodash library. Then we'll go ahead and require it, requiring Lodash. Now, I've used regular variables here instead of constants for my other imports. I can go ahead and switch these to constants as well. Perfect. Now that we have this in place, we are ready to move to the bottom of the file and start adding the new route. This route is going to use the HTTP patch method. Patch is what you use when you want to update a resource. Now remember, none of this is really set in stone. I could have a delete route that creates new to-dos, and I could have a post route that deletes to-dos, but these are just the general guidelines and best practices for API development. Right here, we're going to set up a patch route by calling app.patch. This is what is going to allow us to update to-do items. Now, the URL is going to be the exact same URL as it has been when we're managing an individual to-do item, /todos/:ID. Then we can set up our callback with our request and response arguments. Inside of the callback, one of the first things that we're going to need to do is grab that ID just like we do for all our other routes. I'm going to make a variable called ID set equal to request.params.id. Now on the next line, we're going to go ahead and create a variable called body. And this is the reason I loaded in Lodash. The body, the request body, that's where the updates are going to be stored. If I want to set a to-do's text to something else, I would make a patch request. I would set the text property equal to whatever I wanted the to-do text to be. The problem here is that someone can send any property along. They could send along properties that aren't on the to-do items, or they could send along properties we don't want them to update. For example, completed at. Completed at is going to be a property that gets updated, but it's not going to be updated by the user. It's going to be updated by us when the user updates the completed property. Completed at is going to be generated by the program, which means we do not want a user to be able to update it. In order to pull off just the properties we want users to update, we're going to be using the pick method, _.pick. Pick is fantastic. It takes an object. We're going to pass in request.body. Then it takes an array of properties that you want to pull off if they exist. For example, if the text property exists, we want to pull that off of request body, adding it to body. This is something the user should be able to update. And we'll do the same thing for completed. These are the only two properties a user is going to be able to update. We don't need users updating IDs or adding any other properties that aren't specified in the Mongoose model. Now that we have this in place, we can get started down the usual path, kicking things off by validating our ID. There's no need to rewrite this code since we've written it before and we know what it does. We can simply copy and paste it right there. And now we can go ahead and move on to the slightly complex part of patch, which is going to be checking the completed value and using that value to set completed at. If a user is setting a to-do's completed property to true, we want to set completed at to a timestamp. If they're setting it to false, we want to clear that timestamp because the to-do won't be completed. Right here, we're going to add an if statement checking if the completed property is a Boolean and it's on body. We're going to use the _.isBoolean utility method to get that done. We want to check if body.completed is a Boolean. If it is a Boolean and that Boolean is true, body completed, then we're going to go ahead and run some code. This code is going to run if it's a Boolean and it's true, else we're going to run some code if it's not a Boolean or it's not true. If it is a Boolean and it is true, we're going to set body.completed@. Everything we set on body is eventually going to be updated in the model. Now, we don't want the user to update everything, so we've picked off certain ones from the request body, but right here we can make some modifications of our own. We're going to set this equal to the current timestamp. We're going to create a new date, which we've done before, but instead of calling toString, which is the method we used in the previous section, we'll be using a method called getTime. GetTime returns a JavaScript timestamp. This is the number of milliseconds since midnight on January 1st of the year 1970. It's just a regular number. Values greater than 0 are milliseconds from that moment forward. Values less than 0 are in the past. So if I had a number of -1,000, it would be 1,000 milliseconds before that Unix epoch, which is the name for that date, that January 1st at midnight on 1970. Now that we have that in place, we can go ahead and fill out the else clause. Inside of the else clause, if it is not a Boolean or it's not true, we're going to go ahead and set body.completed equal to false, and we're also going to clear completed@. Body.completed@ is going to get set equal to null. When you want to remove a value from the database, you can simply set it to null. Now we're going to go ahead and follow a usual pattern. We're going to be making a query to actually update the database. The query that we're going to be making is going to be really similar to the one we made in our MongoDB update file. Inside of here, we used a method called find_one_and_update. It took a query, the update object, and a set of options. We're going to be using a method called find_by_id_and_update, which takes a really similar set of arguments. Right here in server, we will call todo.find_by_id_and_update. The first argument for find_by_id_and_update is going to be the ID itself. Since we're using a find_by_id method, we can simply pass in the ID as opposed to passing in a query. Now we can go ahead and set the values on our object, which is the second argument. Remember, you can't just set key value pairs. You have to use those MongoDB operators, things like increment, or in our case, set. Now set, as we explored, takes a set of key value pairs, and these are going to get set. In this case, we've already generated the object I have highlighted here. We just happen to generate it up here, and it happens to be called body. So I will set the $set operator equal to the body variable. Now we can go ahead and move on to the final options. These are just some options that let you tweak how the function works. If you remember, in MongoDB update, we set return original to false. This means we get the new object back, the updated one. We're going to use a similar option with a different name. It's called new. It has similar functionality. It just has a different name because that's what the Mongoose developers chose. With a query in place, though, we are done. We can tack on a then callback and a catch callback and add our success and error code. If things go well, we're going to get our to-do doc back. If things don't go well, we are going to get an error argument, and we can go ahead and send back a 400. Response.status 400.send. Now inside of here, we are going to need to check if the to-do object exists. If it doesn't, if there is no to-do, then we're going to go ahead and respond with a 404. Return response.status 404.send. If the to-do does exist, that means we were able to find it and it was updated. So we can simply send it back. Response.send. And we're going to send it back as the to-do property, where to-do equals the to-do variable using the ES6 syntax. With this in place, we are now done. It's not too bad, but it was a little more complex than any of the routes we've done before, so I wanted to walk you through it step by step. Let's take just a quick moment to recap what we did and why we did it. First up, the first unusual thing we did is we created this body variable. This has a subset of the things the user passed to us. We don't want the user to be able to update anything they choose. Next up, we update the completed@ property based off of the completed property. And finally, we make our call to find_by_id_and_update. With these three steps, we are able to successfully update our to-dos when we make the patch call. Now to test this out, I'm going to save the server file and start up the server over in the terminal. I'll use clear to clear the terminal output, and we can run npm start to start up the app. The app is up and running on port 3000, so over inside of Postman, we can make some requests to see exactly how this works. I'm going to switch to the To-Do app local environment and make a get to-dos request so we can get a real ID for one of our to-do items. And you can see we have some old data from our tests right here. I'm going to grab this second one with a text equal to second test to-do. Then I'm going to go ahead and create a new request, changing the method from get to patch. Right here, we're going to provide our URL. It'll be the curly braces URL with closing curly braces. Then we'll have /todos / the ID we copied. Now remember, the patch request is all about updating the data, so we have to provide that data as the request body. I'm going to go to body raw JSON in order to do just that. Right here, let's go ahead and make some updates to the to-do. I'm going to set completed equal to true. And if you look in the Get To-Dos tab, you can see that that to-do has a completed value of false, so it should change, and the completed app property should get added. With the request set up, I'm going to go ahead and send it off, and down below, what do we get? We get our to-do. Completed is set to true, and completed at is set to the timestamp. Now I can also go ahead and tweak this, changing completed true to completed false to send off the request. This now sets completed equal to false and clears completed at. Lastly, we could go ahead and do something like setting the text. I'm going to set it back to true and add a second property text, setting that equal to updates from Postman. I can fire off this request, and down below we get our to-do looking just as we would expect it to look. We have our text update, we also have our completed update, and the timestamp showing up in the completed at field. With this in place, we now have the ability to get, delete, update, and create to-do items. Those are the 4 main CRUD actions. The next thing we're going to do is write some tests that verify patch works as expected so we can automatically run them and catch any regressions in our code. For now, that is it. We're going to go ahead and in the terminal make a commit and push our changes. We'll push them up to Heroku and test that out as well. Git status reveals that we have just those 2 changed files, which means we can use git commit with the AM flag to make the commit. A good message for this one, add patch /todos / ID. I'm going to make the commit and push it up to GitHub. And once it's on GitHub, we can push it up to Heroku using git push Heroku master. Remember, the master branch is the only branch Heroku has access to. We're not going to be using branching in this course, but in case you already know branching and you're running into any issues, you do need to push to the Heroku master branch to have your app redeploy. Like I said, that is not an issue if you're using all the commands as I use them in the videos. Now that the app is deployed, we can go ahead and open it up. We're going to open it up by making requests inside of Postman. I'm going to switch to the To-Do app Heroku environment. Then I'm going to go ahead and inside of Get To-Dos, fire off the request. These are all the to-dos available on Heroku. I'm going to grab this first one. I'm going to go over to the patch request, swap out the ID, and we can keep the same body. I'm going to set completed equal to true and text equal to updates from Postman. When I send that off, what do we get back? We get back the updated to-do. Completed looks great. Completed at looks great, and text looks great as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and add this to my collection. The patch call is going to come in handy down the line, so I will save it as, giving it the name we've used for all of ours, the HTTP method, followed by the URL. I am going to save it to our existing collection To-Do app. Perfect. With this in place, we are done. We have our patch route working, and it's time to move on to the next video where we will test this code. Stay tuned. I will see you then.